I'm not ashamed.
What does it mean that Jesus is the Lord of the Sabbath? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Matthew on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Matthew chapter 12. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 8. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Matthew chapter 12, beginning at verse 1. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would have not condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." As we've said numerous times in the recent episodes, Matthew is not claiming to give us a chronology of the events of Jesus' ministry, instead choosing to group the narrative into similar themes. We have seen some of the early teachings of Jesus and then the miracles of Jesus. As we'll see in this chapter and beyond, there is a deepening hostility that is developing between the Jewish leaders and Jesus, a hostility that Matthew brings to light through the grouping of these stories together. In today's reading, which Luke 6 verse 1 in the New King James Version would imply occurs around the Passover time, and thus chronologically most likely before the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus and his disciples were passing through the grain fields on the Sabbath day. Along the way, the disciples were hungry, and so began to pluck and eat the heads of the grain. Now today we would call this theft, but not so under the law of Moses. In Deuteronomy 23:25 we read, "When you come into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the heads with your hand, but you shall not use a sickle on your neighbor's standing grain." So the people who need to eat were allowed to pluck the heads of the grain with their hand and eat, but they weren't to take a sickle to it, meaning that they would cut down more than they needed in order to take it home with them. So when the Pharisees came to Jesus, they didn't accuse the disciples of theft. Instead, they accused the disciples of breaking the Sabbath. The Sabbath law, in short, is given in Exodus 28-11, which reads, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." The law of Moses was clear. You weren't to do any work on the Sabbath. Now, was what the disciples were doing considered work? Yes. For otherwise it would be lawful to plow on the Sabbath day as well. Then why weren't the Pharisees correct in their charge? Because Jesus is not only going to show their hypocrisy in the matter, he is also going to show their misunderstanding of the law. He refers them first to David. In 1 Samuel 21, 1-7, a story that you can read on your own time, we have the story of David running for his life from King Saul, coming to Ahimelech the priest. David asked for food in order for he and his men to avoid starvation, but the only bread present was the showbread of the tabernacle. What we must understand, though, is that the showbread, according to Leviticus 24, 5-9, was only to be eaten by the priests. So under normal circumstances, what David would be doing here is unlawful. However, because of the extreme circumstances, and because there was no other options of avoiding starvation, David and his men did not sin by eating of the showbread, a fact that the Pharisees recognized. If then they could recognize David as being righteous in the matter, the same courtesy should be given to Jesus' disciples, who again were only doing what was necessary in providing for their hunger. Jesus, though, went further by showing that even the law itself has the priests profaning or working on the Sabbath day by performing sacrifices and circumcisions, and yet they are blameless before God. Why? Because they were doing those things that were necessary to be done, even on the Sabbath. All of this brings to the forefront not only the hypocrisy of the Pharisees by justifying David but condemning the apostles for basically doing the same thing. But it shows their misunderstanding of the law too. That's why Jesus said if they knew what Hosea 6:6 meant when it said that God desired mercy and not sacrifice, they wouldn't have condemned Jesus' disciples. The Sabbath was meant as a day of rest, not as a straitjacket meant to prevent man from doing necessary things. Jesus' disciples had been traveling and therefore needed to eat. It was therefore the merciful thing to do to allow them to eat, even if this meant a little work on the Sabbath. And because Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, meaning the creator of the Sabbath, in other words, God himself, he was the one who had the power over it, and thus was the only one who could perfectly interpret what was and wasn't allowed to be done on the Sabbath. With that, our time is up for today. Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Matthew 12:9-14 as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
I'm not ashamed.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.